Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Torah Talk Weekly Parsha. It's been a long time, and I'd like to welcome to the stage my dear friend, Rabbi Rafi Molot. Very long time waiting for us to get together, and I think we finally pinned him down, and he finally pinned us down. My hat's all crooked. I hit my head on the microphone a minute ago. So welcome. Very glad to have you. Very glad to have you on the show, no doubt.
Thank you very much, William. It's a great honor for me to be here. I told you before the show, I've been a big fan of Tanakh Talk for many years. I started with you and Rabbi Singer years ago. I've been a fan along the way, so for me to be invited as a guest is really such a wonderful feeling. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And so this week's Parsha, Bechukotai, depends on where you're at. Weekly Parsha, Leviticus 26, verse 3 is where we're going to kick off at. And so first, just introduction, everybody. So you are, well, an Orthodox rabbi. You live in Jersey. Where did you say you live? You're in Jersey or somewhere?
Houston, Texas.
Oh, you were from Jersey. Now you're in Houston?
Where am I from? I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, New York. Okay,
I
gotcha.
presently live in Houston, Texas.
Gotcha. Now currently in Houston, Texas, which is cool because some of the viewers are in Houston, and they may find it interesting to run into you from time to time. So that would be kind of cool. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to I'm going to let him run, and I may interrupt him because, hey, I got a question, And if you guys have questions, put them in the YouTube chat. You're going to want to put the @ symbol, Tanakh Talk, and that way it shows up on my side with a big yellow. It'll show up really bright, and I'll be able to glance. I can scroll real fast and find your question or comment in seconds. If you don't, I will probably miss it. So if you have a question, and it needs to be regarding this week's Parsha, that's the key. We're not going to do any questions answering here on this format with New Testament questions or stuff about Genesis or anything like that, or even whatever. So make sure that it's topic oriented for today's show. And then at the end of the show, if we have any time left over, I will pull those chat questions out, and we may even open up the phone lines so you guys can call in and say hi and ask your questions about the weekly Parsha. So that's kind of where we're headed. So Rabbi, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kick off, and I'll try to follow you along with some text on the screen as well.
Okay, great.
Very good.
Thank you so much,
yes,
William.
Sir. Very good.
All right. Great to be here. We are in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 3, beginning the final portion in the book of Leviticus called Bechukotai or Bechukotai. And very often, many years, this portion will be combined with the one before, which is called Bahar. Very frequently, these two portions will be combined because, we have a limited number of weeks in the year, and there's actually more portions than weeks. So in most years, we have to combine portions in order to fit the whole reading of the Torah into an entire year. However, this year on the Hebrew calendar is a leap year. Now, leap year in Hebrew means that we add an entire month. How do we add an entire month? We add an entire month because the Hebrew calendar follows mainly the lunar months. And so the 12-month lunar year falls a few days short of a solar year. And after a few years, we fall a whole month behind the solar year, if you will, and our holidays start falling out of season. Now, since the Torah commands us to keep the holiday of Passover in the spring season, so we are enjoined then to add a 13th month to the calendar in those leap years. And then we end up with a few extra weeks. And then we can divide out in those years the parshios, the portions that are normally combined, we can divide them out. So we're in one of those exciting years. And the Bechukotai gets its own show. Now, Parshas Bechukotai, to give you a brief summary of the topic, it deals essentially with three main topics. Number one is the blessings that God will bestow upon Israel if they follow the Torah properly as God commands. The, God forbid, curses that will befall the people of Israel if the Torah is not followed properly. And the last part of the Parsha deals with laws regarding consecrated things. That means dedicating certain materials as a gift to the temple, more or less. So we're going to start in section 1, which is the blessings. Now, interestingly, the section of the blessings is pretty short. It's about 11 verses long, whereas the section of the curses is much longer. It's 40, or arguably longer than 40 verses long. So it's about 4 times as long as the blessings, which doesn't seem very fair. Like, hey, 10 verses of blessings and 40 verses of curses? What's going on over here? Now, another thing to know is that this section of curses is very, very famously called in Hebrew the Tochacha. Well, the is an English word, but that's the definite article. It's called a Tochacha. A Tochacha in Hebrew means a rebuke. This section is known as the rebuke, and there are 2 long sections of rebuke in the Torah. One is in this week's portion, and the other one is in the portion of Ki Savo or Ki Tavo in the book of Deuteronomy, and Deuteronomy, as the name implies, sort of reviews a lot of the sections of the previous books of the Torah. So there's something of a review there of these warnings. Now, the Tochacha is very scary. You read through it, and it's unfortunately very sad things to read about that may befall the Jewish people. And standing as we are in the year 2022, we have the benefit of looking back at many thousands of years of Jewish history to see that God wasn't kidding. God wasn't kidding. And these are prophecies that came true. And as a matter of fact, one of the ways that we can verify the truth of the Torah and that it's a divine book, a God-given book, is the very fact that A, this was prophesied, and B, the prophecy came to be. Now, the argument goes something like this. You know, if you wrote a book of a religion and you wanted to sell it to some people that they should become your adherents, right? So what are you going to put in the book? You're going to sweet talk them. You're going to sweet talk, oh, let me tell you what's going to be. If you follow my religion, I'm going to promise you all the rewards. Now, by the way, you wouldn't promise rewards in this world because you can't fulfill them, right? You can't make it rain whenever it's supposed to rain. You can't promise yields of crops. You can't promise victory in wars. You can't promise health. You can't promise prosperity. You can't promise any of those things. So, of course, you're going to fill your book with promises of spiritual delights and rewards in the afterlife, which are absent from this Parsha, meaning even when God speaks of the blessing and the rewards, he only talks about earthly rewards. But so it certainly doesn't fit the format of what we would expect a man-made book of religion to present. But not only that, I mean, would you write such terrible things about what would happen to the adherents of this religion if they don't go by the book? People would look at this book and say, I don't want this. Get me out of here. You know, you want to sweet talk to people. So the fact that the Torah not only doesn't promise spiritual reward, although there certainly is, that's another topic. But the Torah really truncates that and says, let me tell you about things you can see and sense with your own 5 senses. The Torah is called a testament. It is called a testament, a testimony, because it's a book of witness. It's things that we can actually see are true. But not only does it say physical rewards and not spiritual rewards, it puts far more of the negative than the positive, and both of those things are opposite we would expect from a man-made book. And yet you see, if someone would have made such a book and presented it to a group of people, they would have run away from it and said, we don't want something that's filled with such scary prophecies about what's going to happen. And yet the Jews didn't throw it away. They didn't deny it. And the reason the Jews didn't deny this book when they received it was because they knew for a fact, without any doubt, where it was coming from and who it was coming from. So the fact that such a book could be written and accepted by a group of people is in itself evidence that the book originated from a divine source that the people who received it themselves were able to experience in their lifetime. Now, furthermore, we know down the line throughout Jewish history that these prophecies were fulfilled. So the fulfillment of the prophecy is not something that a human being could concoct. So the fulfillment also verifies the veracity of the Torah. So in that way, it stands as a very pivotal section of the Torah. Not only that, so let's go back to what I said before. It's full of scary stuff. Now, because of this, we have a special reaction to it. When it's read in the synagogue, it's read in a special way. And that is, usually the Torah portion is read out loud with a beautiful tune and very clearly, so every word is heard and understood and enunciated. There should be no mistakes, no errors. When we get to the section of the tochacha, the reproof that I described, the reader, the Torah reader, who normally reads out loud for the congregation, will drop his voice to a low volume, and he'll begin to read it very quickly, and he'll start rushing through it. Now, it has to be audible and it has to be comprehensible. Otherwise, the people in the synagogue are not, they're not fulfilling their obligation to hear it. But instead of going overboard with the enunciation and pronunciation and volume, it's done at a minimum and it's raced through as quickly as possible so that we don't cause people to have, panic attacks in their seats. We just kind of, it has that much of a tremendous impact. Okay, everything I said until now was basically background information and summation of the topics in the Parsha and what sort of standing it holds in the milieu of Judaism. Now I want to examine some particular points in the Parsha and bring out some beautiful ideas. We'll begin at the beginning. What a beautiful place to start. In verse 3, which is the first verse in this section, again, Leviticus 26, verse 3, it says as follows. Im Bechukotai telechu, if you will walk in my statutes. Now this is the English translation. Ve'es mitzvosai tishmoru, and you will observe my commandments or guard my commandments. Va'asisem osam, and you do them, you perform them. Verse 4. If you will do that, then, verse 4, I will give rain in its time, and the earth will produce its fruit, and the fields will give forth its yield. And so on, it goes through these blessings of abundance of produce. There'll be peace in the land, and this means not only in the land of Israel, but throughout the world. That means the benefits of the observance of the Torah and the promises that God gives to the Jews is really for the whole world. It's actually for the whole world. What we do affects the entire world. And for a Noahide, his performance of his commandments, it has a similar status. So God promises peace. There won't be wild animals that will trouble you. They're the enemies that you fight, I guess, before the peace, because if there's peace, there's no enemies. But leading up to it, the wars that you are required to fight, your enemies will fall before you. A small number of you will chase many. God says, I will multiply you, and I will put my divine presence among you. I will be a God for you, you will be a nation for me, and so on. Okay, so all these beautiful promises, so much so that our commentaries understand, our sages understand, and the reader should understand. This is not a deep dive over here, that the complete fulfillment of these promises is what we understand, what we would put in different terminology to be the Messianic era. What we call today the Messianic era, meaning a utopian future where all the disrepair in the world and all the pain of this life is put right, and we live in a beautiful, idyllic form of the earth. So the fulfillment of this would be essentially the fulfillment of everything that God promises to us, and that the prophets elaborate on more in other books. But it's sort of truncated into just 11 verses over here. Now, the first question that you should already be scratching your head to ask is, right in that first verse that I read you, if you will walk in my statutes, if you will guard or keep my commandments and do them. We have statutes, walking in the statutes, and then we have guarding commandments and fulfilling them. What is the difference between these things? There's not one extra word in the Torah. God didn't get paid by the word. Every word that God writes has a message. In fact, our sages tell us it's not just every word, every letter, and not just every letter, but every single jot of the letter contains information if we would know how to read it properly. So at the very least, when we have gratuitous wordage, we have to know what is the meaning here, the basic meaning. Walking in my statutes. What are statutes? What does it mean to walk in them? And what's the difference between that and guarding the commandments, or keeping the commandments and doing them? Commandments, statutes, walking, guarding, doing. What are all these things? Now, if I was in a live class, I would wait for you to participate. But I'm at the disadvantage of I can't see you and I can't hear you. So I'm just going to imagine that you're all shouting at your TV screens, not TV, God forbid. You're all shouting at your holy computer monitors through which you stream only Torah classes. You're screaming, this is what it means. You're giving me all your answers, and I wish I could hear you and acknowledge you and validate you. But instead, you're going to have to listen to me. So our first thing we'll talk about, just to make it simple. Simple level, simple. Commandments, mitzvos. It says, and my commandments you will guard and you will do. So mitzvos are commandments. Before we get to statutes, what's the difference between guarding and doing? This is very simple what I'm telling you. Super plain. ABCs, first grade. Ready? To guard the mitzvah is the same word in Hebrew. Lishmor means to guard or to keep, because keeping is guarding if you know English. Same thing in English and Hebrew. It means when God commands you, don't do this thing, that's called guarding, is that you listen to God when he says don't. I don't do the thing I'm not supposed to do. That is guarding.
See, I figured that the guarding part would be, like putting the fence around it, like which was adding more guidelines to make sure you don't.
This is what I love. I love that you piped in and you helped me to feel like I'm talking to a human being.
Okay, good.
I know I'm talking to many human beings, but it's hard because I'm staring at a webcam. I want to see all your beautiful faces. So William said, guarding maybe means to put a fence around. So you're not incorrect. However, the fences are rabbinic, and I would love to elaborate on it, but I want to keep to the Parsha. The fences are rabbinic, and yet the rabbis said we have to enact rabbinic fences. That means, whatever the Torah's law is, we may find in situations that to keep people from accidentally getting carried away and breaking God's law, if we set up a fence like one step before that, it helps people be mindful and not break the law of God. So, the classic rabbinic example, that's given is on the Sabbath, a Jew is not allowed to perform what's called malacha, which is a creative labor. An example would be writing. A Jew is not allowed to produce words on the Sabbath. Now, because of this, the rabbis created a fence called, in Hebrew, muktzeh. And muktzeh means items that must be set aside on the Sabbath. These are objects, items, tools, implements that might be used to produce a malacha, to produce a creative act. So just like I can't write, but I'm allowed to pick up a pencil, according to the Torah. The Torah doesn't say you can't pick up a pencil. Picking up a pencil is not a creative act. I didn't make anything happen over here. I didn't bring anything new into the world. Whereas writing language is creating communication, meaningful text. So the rabbi said, don't pick up the pencil. The pencil is muktzeh. It is an item that must be set aside. Why? What's wrong with playing with a pencil? You know why? Because if you're playing with the pencil, you're going to sort of absent-mindedly start doodling. And then you just abrogated a Torah law on Shabbos. So what we've done is we've created a step before that to allow you to be mindful. And you never end up in a situation where you mistakenly go and break God's law. That's a classic example of offense. Now, where is the dispensation to do such a thing? We know we're not allowed to add to the Torah or subtract from it. That's a Torah command. So, in fact, it's not adding to the Torah.
Right.
You know why? Very simple. Because the rabbis never said, this is what's written in the Torah.
Exactly.
We acknowledge what's written in the Torah, and we are all acknowledging that not adding to the Torah, because the Torah stands as we are creating something separate called the rabbinic law. It has a different status. It has a lesser status. We don't put it on the same pedestal as the Torah law. So there are circumstances where one can more easily abrogate a rabbinic law. It will be less severe than a Torah law.
When my kids were younger, they were like 5 and 6 or so. They would play in the front yard, and we don't actually have a fence out there at all. So they would kick the ball back and forth in the front yard, and I told them the only rule is stay out of the street. It's not a busy street, but we do have neighbors. I said the only rule is stay out of the street. And so I'm sitting in there in the front porch drinking some coffee, and they're kicking the ball, and one of them kicked the ball out into the street. And naturally, what did they do? They went out in the street to get it. And I called them up. I said, listen, I gave you one rule, stay out of the street. And I said, don't break that again. Next time the ball went out there, they looked both ways. They're like real fast. Went to grab, came back, and I saw it, and I said, okay. I said, guys, listen, here's what we're going to do. So I literally tied a rope off from the corner of the garage about 75 feet over and wrapped it around the tree. And I said, okay, guys, here's what I want you to do. No matter what, you see that red rope right there? I said, do not go past that rope for any reason whatsoever. You need to go past that red rope. You come find me. And so they're like, well, Dad, you said that the rule was stay out of the road. I said, yeah, I'm not changing that because that's still the rule, but I'm putting this up to protect you from subconsciously or unwittingly just doing something you shouldn't. And to me, that helped me understand how the laws and how the oral law is actually a tool to help and aid, and not like this big curse that a lot of people seem to claim it to be.
Yeah, God forbid. And I was planning to talk about that a little bit, but I'm off on a little bit of a tangent. But
go for it.
Putting aside the idea of a rabbinic fence, and aside from not adding to the Torah, which it's not, they're not adding to the Torah. The Torah remains exactly what it is, but on the side, creating something distinct and identifying it as so. You shouldn't confuse the two. In fact, there's some discussion. If you were to observe a rabbinic command and think that it is commanded by the Torah, you might be abrogating the law of not adding to the Torah. So we have to be very clear in our distinctions. This is what the Torah commands. This is what the rabbis command. We distinguish. But we also have a commandment in the Torah. It says, I'm not Rabbi Tovia Singer. I cannot tell you off the top of my head what verse it's in. So someone have to look it up and put it in the chat notes. But it says, Ushmartem es mishmarti. It's the same word, shamor, to guard. And you shall guard es mishmarti, God says. My safeguards, which are what? The commandments of don't do them, don't do that, don't do. That's the safeguards of God. He safeguards us. Ushmartem es mishmarti. You have to guard my safeguards. So in that way, he commanded us to place guards around his safeguards. But that's not what's being said in this verse. That's a dispensation to create rabbinic fences. But as long as we distinguish. But in this verse, it says, my commandments, my mitzvos, which are the Torah commands, guard them. But it means keep them. But it means, of course, keeping. Do you keep kosher? Not like that. It means when I say don't do something, don't do it. That's called keeping or guarding the law. We call it something in Hebrew, which translates in English as a negative commandment. This is what we would call a negative commandment, a don't do. When we don't do, we are guarding the command. We are fulfilling a negative commandment. In Hebrew, that's called a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, a commandment not to do. Then we get to the next part of the verse, which says, and you shall do them, right? If you will walk in my statutes, and you will guard my commandments, and do them, guard them, and do them. My commandments guard, and my commandments do. Doing the commandments is the other kind. This was when God says, get up and do this thing, right? So for a Jew, that would be on Passover, eat the matzah on Passover night. It would be on the festival of Sukkot, Sukkot, the tabernacles, whatever you call booths, right? We go into our outdoor thing and we pick up our 4 plant species identified in the Torah, and we hold them up and we do what we do with them, because God says, do this, do this, do this, give charity, whatever it is. When we do that, that's called a positive command, a mitzvah aseh, a commandment to do, that's doing. So all I'm doing now is explaining Hebrew. That's it. I didn't tell you anything deep. Here's the meaning of the words. Guard my commandments. When I say don't do it, don't do it. Do my commandments. When I say do it, you do it. That's it. Simple. But the first part of the verse becomes mysterious in retrospect. So what does it mean to walk in my statutes? In what way is a statute distinct from a commandment? And what does it mean to walk in them rather than do them or don't do them? You hear the question? Now I'm going to do simple step number 2. We just did right ABC. Now we'll do DEF. There are different categories of commandments that are identified in the Torah. Aside from what I already told you of the category of negative and positive, there are 2 categories that are known as chukim and mishpatim. Chukim, from the word chok, is translated as statute in English. I don't know what a statute is, but a chok means, literally from the Hebrew word to engrave, it's like a law that's engraved. What does that do for me? Hold that thought. Mishpat, a law that's called a mishpat, has to do with usually with a court, because lishpot is to judge, a shofet is a judge. A mishpat is a legal judgment, a legal judgment. So it's like the judgments and the statutes. What are the difference between the judgments and the statutes? Classically, telling you, this is first grade stuff, everybody. Classically, the difference between a mishpat and a chok, a law and a statute, is a chok, a statute, are laws we don't understand. They are mysterious. They're sometimes called the ritual laws.
Like the red heifer.
Like the red heifer, right? When you become spiritually impure, even the whole idea of spiritual purity, impurity, it's something I can't detect with my physical sense. It's something purely spiritual, purely mystical, that I really have to just go on faith that God said it is so, and therefore I believe it is so. And he said, these are the procedures that you do in order to, this causes purity, and this is what causes impurity, and this is what restores purity. And we have the red heifer with the ashes and the water and the sprinkling. It's very mysterious, but this is what God decreed. It's like a decree from God. It's just etched in stone. It is what it is. I cannot understand it, and maybe we can seek to look for rationalizations, and that's praiseworthy, to make it more palatable. Oh, I can detect that it has these worldly benefits to it, and it makes sense but on a deeper level, it's really very mysterious. Wearing phylacteries, tefillin for Jews, the black leather boxes with black leather straps, and there's scrolls inside with certain portions. What does that do? Well, spiritually, it's doing X, Y, Z, but it's physically speaking, it's hard. Now you're going to say they did these studies and they saw with putting the phylacteries on the arm and the way it sort of tightens around the blood vessels, it creates a certain benefit for the heart and heart pressure and whatever studies they came out that maybe the tefillin has these blood pressure and whatever. Okay, we could find rational, but ultimately it's something mysterious. Kosher laws. Why is this animal more spiritually beneficial to eat than that animal? Milk and meat together, right? What's wrong with a cheeseburger? God said. Chok. It's just, God said, that's why. Okay? Chok. Mysterious law. Sometimes they're called, again, the ritual laws. Not a great translation. Mishpat. It's sensible, it's logical, it's rational. Don't murder. Don't steal. Give charity. Kindness to the widow. Kindness to the stranger. Kindness to the orphan. These sort of man with man laws that seem very beneficial to society and logical and rational, and almost to the point you would say, if God wouldn't have commanded me this, I would have done it anyway, because it makes sense to do, right? That's a mishpat. It's what they call a logical law, a rational law. So here, when it says Bechukotai, if you will go in my statutes, it seems to be referring to, in particular, the mysterious laws, and we should walk in them. But where did the rational laws go? Mm-hmm. Those don't matter. Whether I'm kind to my neighbor, whether I protect the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, that's not going to bring you the blessings. No, the blessings are going to come from keeping kosher, keeping Shabbos, wearing the phylacteries. Now, here becomes also a very big question. to Noahides, we have the Noahide laws, which essentially are all logical laws. They're all rational laws. They're not rituals. They're not mysterious like the laws of the Jews. I have to put fringes on the corners of my garments with a blue string, like mysterious. But so what about Noahides over here? It's not acknowledging the rational laws. And yet it must be, because it says, if you will keep my mitzvos, guard my commandments, do the commandments, right? So on the one side I have negative and positive commandments. On the other side I have statutes, but I'm missing the laws. Why is that missing? Why? In other words, maybe the verse was just phrasing it in two different ways. One way is dividing the laws according to rational laws versus irrational laws. And then the second half of the verse, it just phrases it as negative, positive. But I don't have the balance. On the side where it talks about chukim, statutes, which I see as mystical laws, it doesn't balance it with the rational laws. Where did they go? Where did they go? So, I know you're screaming the answer at the screen. You're not going to bear with me. Listen to this. Because ultimately, even the rational laws have to be related back to God. As, you know what, you're going to say, if God hadn't commanded it, maybe I would have done it anyway. But would you have? In other words, morality, we call moral laws. Don't kill. Don't steal. Right? Be kind to your fellow. Don't commit adultery. Don't commit incest. But if I don't have the authority of God on top of that, isn't it very malleable? Don't we see in society today how they're blurring the lines of what's called murder and what's not called murder? What's called a life and what's not called a life? Who I'm not allowed to kill, but who maybe I am allowed to kill? With stealing, right. Is it really so bad if I, what's considered stealing? I mean, is he even going to notice? It's only a few cents. We start to blur the lines with all these laws. So even the rational ones, they need an authority. They need some objectivity to say. And and the atheist who says, I'm a rational person, I follow, I'm very moral. Why are you moral? If there's no God, why is it wrong to kill somebody? Tell me. He's in my way. Mm-hmm. What makes him have more of a right to live than me? I want to have his stuff. I'll take it. Who tells me it's wrong? You, because you don't like it? I don't care about you. I'll kill you. And then I'll have to worry about what you think. In other words, morality itself, and even those atheists and whoever else will stand on that podium, on the soapbox of saying, I'm moral. I don't need God to be moral. Oh, yeah, you do, because if you don't need God to be moral, why is being moral right? Who said it's right? Maybe you're an idiot for not knocking that guy out of the way and taking what you want. Who's to dictate who I'm allowed to have intimate relations with and who not? So she's married to him, but she likes me too. Too bad. Morality, who told you what's right and wrong in morality? Ultimately, those are also rooted in God, which means we have to view, ultimately, even though on a surface level we can detect, these laws are more mysterious and these laws are more appealing to the intellect and understandable and intuitive. But ultimately, even the intuitive so-called logical laws have to be rooted in spirituality, have to be rooted to a higher source and say, I do it because God commanded it. I don't murder? Because God commanded it, that's why. I don't steal because God commanded it that way. And then I never can do it. I can never rationalize it. And I can never imagine, really, does it really matter? I mean, the whole universe is an accident anyway. The universe cares whether I murder or not. It starts to fall apart. The whole fabric of society and morality and decency falls apart if we don't have an objective moral authority that's God. And I believe that's what's being conveyed by mushing the two categories together into one, the chukim, the mysterious laws that we say, God commanded it, that's why I do it. Everything is like that. Even though many places in the Torah it distinguishes, but sometimes we have to take away that distinction and recognize everything is from God.
Right.
Everything is from God. Now it goes. Now for Noahide, this is especially relevant because since the laws of Noach, like we said, are not ritual laws, they're essentially rational moral laws to begin with. So if a guy's going to say, I'm a moral person because it makes me feel good to be a moral person, is he serving God? Is he serving God? No, he's not. So a person could spend his whole life essentially keeping the laws of Noah by accident because he felt like it, because he wanted to, because it appealed to him, but never connecting with God, never creating a relationship with God, never serving God. Therefore, the Ben Noach has to have a mindset when he keeps his morality and his decency and follows the laws that apply to him to say, I'm doing it because God commanded it. Even if that's not the only reason. Maybe you do because it really has a societal benefit and you appreciate not getting murdered by your neighbor. So in turn, you don't murder him either. That's okay. It's okay. But insert into there somewhere, it's God's decree. It's by God. I'm connecting with God. I'm walking with God. You walk in my statutes. I'm connecting it with God. God's here. God's here, because look, even with the other commandments, the don't do's and the do's, I could go through even a Jew, an Orthodox Jew. We can go through the motions, from the time we're children till the time we're adults. And now I do this, and now I do that. Put the tefillin on, take the tefillin off, get up, bow down, open the book, read the words. We take the thing, shake it like this, eat the matzah, make a bracha. We could do it our whole life and never connect to God because we're like robots going through machines. You have to be thoughtful.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. I've heard because my wife actually has a friend named Sandy, and she lives out of state, but a high school friend, and she's a self-claimed atheist or agnostic more, and she Chris is like, all the Noahide laws that we're aware of is that she kind of does all those natural already because they're the natural, real obvious things. And I told her, I said, I don't think that means that she qualifies to be a Noahide because you have to do it with intent. You have to not do it with intent, right? You can't just accidentally do it and be qualified for that, right? You kind of have to say, I'm doing this because Hashem said not to, right?
Okay, so it's a big topic, and it could be a whole class on the laws of Noah. How do we fulfill them, and who's considered a Noahide? Is a Christian considered a Noahide? Is a Muslim considered a Noahide? Because essentially, Christians at least think they're worshiping one God. Muslims do worship one God. They don't murder. They don't steal, at least according to their standards, right? Essentially, you could look and they're sort of fulfilling it anyway, but is that enough, or do they have to do it because it was commanded through Moses at Sinai, right? If a person just happens to go through is that a fulfillment or not? What's their status in Jewish law? It's a big topic that wasn't going to be my topic. So I will leave it a question mark. I'll say, that's a great question, and it's deserving of a discussion another time. How's that?
That works.
Okay.
That works, yes, sir.
So, but it's a good question, and I'm not going to tell you that the answer is black and white. I will not tell you the answer is black and white. So, not a simple matter. But I was saying something. Yeah. So,
regarding the
walking my statutes, ultimately everything is a statute. Everything is a chok. Everything is just a divine decree that we do because we do. What I was going to elaborate on that is that a rabbi say in the Mishnah in Tractate Makos, a beautiful thing. It says, look how much God loves us. Look how much God loves us, that he gave us laws that are so easy to keep. For example, it says, don't eat bugs. Don't eat insects, right?
That's a burden, right?
You ever look at an insect and go, I want that to be my lunch, right? You're like, oh, if the thought of an insect going in your mouth, you could gag on the thought, right?
Right.
So, I command you not to eat it. Did God think we were going to eat insects? Now, granted, it really becomes practical when we talk about produce and the fact that oftentimes produce are infested with insects, and we are required. The Jews are required who have kosher dietary laws to inspect the produce to make sure that it is not infested with bugs, and we're not likely to eat a bug when we eat it. If we don't, then we're culpable for causing ourselves to eat a bug. We're not eating on purpose, but if we don't check the produce that is likely to be infested to determine that it's not infested, then we are culpable for eating bugs should we eat a bug. But consciously speaking, no one is looking to eat bugs. So the rabbis point out, said, this was a softball, God. Why did you command us this? Another one. Don't eat blood. Don't eat blood, right? And if I pour you a cup of blood, and you're like, blood, woohoo! Like, blood. We're so grossed out by blood. Some people pass out at the sight of blood. Blood is something that's like horrifying for us. You have to put a rated R on the movie if there's going to be blood because somebody's very sensitive. We see blood, we freak out.
Right.
Don't eat blood. I'm going to eat it. I don't even want to see it. So the rabbis say, what? Just to give us reward. Just to give us reward that all we have to do is say, I'm not eating this bug. You see a cockroach running in the corner. I will not eat this cockroach because God commanded me so. Now let's be honest. It's not the reason, but you can imbue. You are not eating. He gave us I would never think of it in a million years, but now God said, you could serve me by not eating the cockroach. I'm giving you that opportunity. You could serve me by not eating the blood. And Rabbi Victor Miller used to give the example. Now it's become something of a custom. When you say something over from Rav Miller, you have to say it in his voice. He had a very particular voice, and it's endearing. People say things in his voice. He says, you're walking down the street in the July heat, and this is especially true in Texas, in the July heat, and you notice across the street, there's the carcass of some roadkill, and it's been baking in the sun for a couple of weeks, and it smells so bad that you have to walk on the other side of a street to avoid it. If you will say at that moment, I will not eat that dead carcass because God commanded me so, then you get a reward for that from God. So that we have opportunities to imbue all of our actions, even the ones we would never think to relate to God, with divinity. So what I want to say is this is the idea of walking with God. Walking with God as opposed to says you should walk in my statutes. I have a New York accent when I say walk in my statutes as opposed to just keep my commands, it's because it has to be imbued with a sense of God is here. I am connecting to God when I do this. I'm building a relationship with God. I'm with God, He is with me, and that's how I live my life. I had a teacher. He told me I was never there. He told me this story in a certain synagogue in New York. I'm guessing it was New York because that's where we lived. But he was telling me about this synagogue where before prayers would begin, the rabbi would give a clap. That means he would bang on the table to get everyone's attention, and he would say "Rabboisai." Rabboisai in Hebrew means gentlemen. Say Rabboisai. There's a boire in the oilam. Now, boire means a creator, and oilam means the world. So he'd say, there's a boire in the oilam. Gentlemen, there's a creator in the world. And then they would begin the prayers. What are you talking about? We're praying. Why are we praying if we don't know there's a creator in the world? We're speaking to him, but no, what I'm telling you is even a Jew keeping his mystical commandments, his ritual laws, can do it so mindlessly and so robotically that there's no God there. So the rabbi would say, yes, John, I know we got together to pray, but let's remember that we're talking, that there's actually a God that we're really talking to right now and communicating, and have that in mind when you pray. Rabbi say, there's a boire in the olam. In Bechukotai telechu, you have to walk in my statutes. You have to walk in my statutes. Now, I said so much on this one verse, and I had so much more prepared just on this verse, and I see we're already in the last quarter of the hour.
So what verse are we on?
What's that?
What verse?
There was some verse 3. We're in the first verse.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So we're just opening up. But
that's great. That's
what
great.
I want to do is I want to move on to one of the questions that I brought up because I already teased it.
Okay,
I can say more on this that's deep and beautiful, but we said something. I hope it's somewhat satisfying. You want to hear more? Send me an email or something. Rabbi Rafi Molot at gmail.com.
There you go. I'll put that back up on your screen for you.
And but I teased a little bit why there's such a small section of the promises of blessing, and then there's such a long section of the curses. And yet we know that when God promises reward, and I think I put this in my notes. I want to see where I put it in. When God promises reward, he promises it in much greater measure than punishment. For example, when God says, that I will visit the iniquity upon 3 or 4 generations, right? And we know that means, because God doesn't visit the iniquity of the father unto the son, that means when they continue in the wicked ways of the fathers. Only the son's own sins bring the visitation of the father's iniquity onto them. But God says for 3 or 4 generations. That's it. 3 or 4 generations, that's as far as it goes. But now why? What happens if they're wicked after that? So Tovia Singer, who I listened to on your program, said a beautiful answer. Because when you have 3 or 4 generations of wickedness, after that the children are no longer maintaining their Jewish identity. So there is no more. They've assimilated, they've intermarried, they've abandoned Judaism, and they're lost to us. They only last 3 or 4 generations. If you don't have a grandparent or a great-grandparent or a great-grandparent, I said great, that observed Shabbos, you don't know you're Jewish today.
Right.
And it's true for me. Myself, my great-great-grandfather was an Orthodox Jew in Russia. His son became secular. His son, after that, my grandfather, was secular. My father grew up secular, but in the midst of his life, he became observant, became a Baal Tshuva.
Wow, that's awesome.
He returned in repentance, and he raised me to be a Torah observant Jew. So if it had waited another generation, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you. But if it's more than 3 or 4 generations, it's over. It's game over. But God says, I will visit the reward of the righteous onto their children for 1,000 or 2,000 generations. 1,000 or 2,000. So our sages point out, do the math. The most you could get for sin is 4 generations, but for the reward, 2,000 generations. That means that the measure of God's reward is 500 times, I'm not a math major, is 500 times greater than his measure for punishment. God, so to speak, pushes with the left and pulls with the right. The right hand, the strong hand, is the one God uses to bring close. And the left hand, the weak hand, is what he uses to push away. He punishes in very small measure compared to what he rewards. And yet here, 11 verses of blessing, 40-something verses of punishment. What's going on? So the reason is, and that more or less, to be transparent. Go ahead, William.
That was something that's really spoke to me as a parent, because it's like, we have kids, I mean, the idea right hand is stronger than your left hand, if you're right-handed, that is, and, the guidance to when you love your child, love them with your right hand. When you discipline them, discipline with your left hand. So.
Right, that's right. And why? Because it says we must emulate God's ways.
Right.
Just as he is merciful, we must be merciful. And yes, we do find that there is a measure of, so to speak, strict justice in the Torah, but it's in much smaller measure to the kindness, and that's the model we're meant to follow. So it's the 80-20 rule, but it could go 99-1. It's also okay with kindness versus strictness.
Right.
It has to be with wisdom, everything according to the situation. It also, our rabbis also tell us that to be too lenient is to be not merciful but cruel. Because if you let this guy go with your revolving door policies in prison and the law, that a guy gets arrested for some heinous crime and he's out on the street the next day because you're so merciful and he murders 3 more people, that wasn't merciful at all. That was very cruel.
Right.
Sometimes the justice is the greatest mercy that we have in our toolkit. But that for another time. So, I'm just looking. I'm trying to multitask. I'm not a good multitasker.
And the time is ticking, isn't it?
I'm looking for it, right? I'm looking for something in my notes that I had prepared. Yeah, okay. It's not. I more or less said it extemporaneously, so I'm not going to look at the notes so much. So you see that the measure of reward is far greater than the measure of so to speak, strict justice. So what's going on here? So the plain answer, or a plain answer, I should say the plain answer, it's the Torah. It's infinitely deep and wide, and that's an open verse. But an answer, I think, is a satisfying approach, is exactly more or less what I told you before. God's rewards are not how should I say it? I'll say it like this. God's rewards are primarily not of this world. As a matter of fact, I'll answer more according to the classic commentaries. What we're looking at here is not reward. This is not reward. This, your rains are going to come in its time and your produce is going to grow and you're going to have peace and da-da-da-da. This is not reward. Maimonides says that the reward for serving God is, and Nachmanides, won't go into the history of these two great sages, but from similar time periods, Spanish great thinkers of the Jews, said that what our sages always told us is that the primary reward for the commandments is spiritual. And if I had the time, I would talk about reward and punishment, which is not really reward is not really reward, and punishment is not really punishment, because that's very crude and mundane. What it is that when we do what God says, what God wants us to do is so good, is so right, that the natural consequence of that is awesome and great and amazing. It could only be beneficial. And when we do what God says not to do, of course it is so wrong that the natural consequence is destruction and doom. It's when you tell your kid, you gave example before, don't run in the street, right? And not your kid, right. No one's kid, imaginary kid is told don't run in the street, and they go, and God forbid a tragic accident happens. Is that a punishment? Was that a punishment? Or was that was a really bad act because the consequence of it is so dire and negative? All God is doing is warning, listen, I created the world with natural consequences. If you want the good ones, here's how you achieve them naturally. And the bad ones, here's how you achieve them naturally. But because the primary service of God is spiritual, the primary reward is spiritual. We live in this world for 70, 80 years. And then what? It's over? Really? That's the whole show? God, a person is a tzelem Elokim. He's an image of God. God breathed into a man the soul of life. Our soul is literally the breath of God. The breath of God is eternal. The body withers, but the breath of God lives forever. So when the world comes to an end, there's nothing left. Of course, the primary life with God is in the world of souls, and that's where we reap the primary benefit of our righteousness, or lack thereof. We reap the other stuff in the next world. So really, this is what I'm telling you is essentially what everyone accepts is true, but I would expect God's going to give me a whole list of things of rewards in this world. The primary reward is not in this world. The primary reward is in the world to come. The fact, says Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, 13th century Spanish sage, the fact that there's any, so to speak, natural beneficial consequence in this world is surprising, that it is a consequence of a spiritual service. Why would a spiritual service have a natural consequence? Because God decreed it to be so. But I would expect is that a spiritual act would have a spiritual consequence. So that there's anything at all written in the Torah is only sauce for the goose. We understand this is what we call megala tefach umachasa alpayim amma. For every hand's breadth that's being revealed, there's 2,000 cubits that are being concealed. So that's a Jewish expression. We're only seeing a very surprising, almost after effect or tip of the iceberg that trickles into this world, but the primary account is in the next world. We don't want to get paid in this world, because if we get paid in this world, then what we walk into in the next world is not going to be all that we would like it to be for eternity, because we benefited here rather than there. So here's where my notes come in. This is an explicit passage in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 9 and 10. It says, and you should know that Hashem your God, He is God. He is a loyal, faithful God. He keeps the covenant and the kindness to those who love Him and to those who keep His commandments for 1,000 generations. We discussed this. But what does it say in the very next verse? And by the way, 1,000 generations cannot be in this world. This world isn't here for 1,000 generations. Or maybe been a few hundred generations in history until now, if we count from Adam till today. Not too many. 1,000, 2,000, we're never going to get there. This is certainly beyond the physical world. But then what it says in the next verse is that he pays to his enemies on his face, to his face, al panav, to his face, to destroy him. Lo ya'acher lasono. He's not going to, ya'acher means to delay. He will not delay to pay his enemy. El panav yashalim lo. He's going to pay him to his face. You know what this means? It means the punishments are in this world. Because God pays the wicked one immediately because he doesn't, let me say it differently. The wicked one who does one good act has an eternal reward for that. God says, I don't want the wicked one with me in eternity for all his wickedness. I'll pay him in this world. And we see the wicked benefit in this world because he's being paid to his face. He's not being delayed. He's being paid now in this short life for everything that he's ever done good. And in the next world, he has no place in the kingdom. But for the righteous, it's the opposite. There's a slight reward in this world, and the main reward is in the next world. Whereas for the righteous who does something wrong, he'll pay him in totality in this world, and therefore there'll be no punishment remaining for eternity. So we see when God is revealing the physical benefits of the commandments, the physical benefits in the commandments of this world are only 11 verses long. The negative commandments are much longer because God says, I want to get all that bad stuff out in this life, because in the next life in eternity, I want you to live forever. So I want you to live forever in bliss without any scars. Okay, I see it's the end of the hour.
Right.
So I think we covered some nice points, and I'll turn it over to you, William. Thank you for having me.
That was great. This is exactly what I envisioned on having on the weekly Parsha. I mean, just exactly like this. I want to keep this up. This is going to be great. I'll try to have a relief pitcher for you from time to time, but as far as we're all concerned, you got the job.
You're a sweet guy.
So
I started with some ABCs. I gave some background. I gave some concepts.
Nice.
From like basic ABCs concepts, and then we went into some deeper lessons for life.
Life applications is great for sure. Hey, real quickly, there is a viewer out there. Apparently, he left out before we got a chance to do this, but he can go back and watch it. Golem 1 is the only thing we have. His mother fell and broke her hip. So if you could offer a refuah shlema for her, that would be amazing.
What, do we have a name or?
It's just his name. Well, the name is Golem 1. It's
Golem 1 is the name of the person whose mother.
Yes, that's the name of the person, YouTube handle of the person whose mother fell and broke their hip.
Okay, let's say a prayer right here and now. Hashem, please, may it be your will that you send from the heavens a complete healing of the body and of the soul to the mother of Golem 1. Amen.
Amen.
Anyone who wants to offer Psalms, have in mind Golem 1's mother, and go ahead.
Excellent.
See you next time.
Very good. Rabbi, thank you so much. It has been a really fulfilling show. Obviously, this right here is just more proof as to why you have to read the Parsha every single week, every year, because it takes a lifetime to learn it all. So that's good stuff. That's really good stuff. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward to next week, Hashem willing, same time, same place. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications, and all goes well. We may have a show in another hour for some Hebrew class, so stay tuned. Rabbi, thanks again. You're a blessing. Looking forward to next week. Shalom, everybody.
You're very welcome.
Awesome. Very good. See you guys. Shalom, my dear friends. I just want to say thank you all for your support of the channel over the past 8 years. Many of you don't know, many of you do. I've been recently fired from my job because of this channel, And for the first time, I've actually been put in a situation to where I can take some time and invest towards making Tanakh Talk much better platform, more organized, better quality videos, emails, this, much shared different content, things like that. So if you guys would be willing, please consider donating monthly to help sustain Tanakh Talk and our family so we can keep this thing going and make it better than it ever has been before. There's going to be some links provided for you in the video description area below the video. Please, if you don't mind, check those out. Greatly appreciate it. Shalom, everybody.
שוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד